Two dead bodies. Lead masks covering their faces. A cryptic note with instructions for a ritual. And absolutely no explanation for what happened on that Brazilian hillside in 1966. August 20th, 1966. Morro do Ventum, a desolate hill overlooking the city of Niterói, Brazil. A young boy flying his kite stumbles upon something that would haunt investigators for decades. Two men, lying side by side, dressed in formal suits and raincoats, their faces concealed behind crude masks made of lead. No signs of struggle, no visible wounds, just death, silence, and a mystery that defies every logical explanation. This is the lead masks case, and what you're about to discover will challenge everything you think you know about unexplained deaths. The victims were Miguel Jose Viana and Manuel Pereira da Cruz, not random drifters, not criminals. They were electronics technicians, educated men, family men. They had jobs, responsibilities, lives that made sense, until the day they climbed that hill and never came back. But here's where it gets disturbing. Next to their bodies, investigators found a small notebook. Inside, a message written in Portuguese. Instructions. A timeline. 1630 be at the determined place. 1830 ingest capsules after effect protect metals await signal mask. What capsules? What signal? Protect metals from what? And why on earth would anyone need masks made of lead? Before we go deeper into this rabbit hole, if you're fascinated by unsolved mysteries that authorities want to forget, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. I need you to do something else. Comment below with your country and city. I want to see how far this mystery has reached. Are you watching from New York, London, Tokyo? Let me know. Because what happened in Brazil could have connections that span the entire globe. Now, let's rewind. Let's understand who these men really were. Miguel Jose Viana, 34 years old, married, an electronics technician working at a respected company in Campos das Goitacazes, a city about 170 miles from where his body was found. Reliable, methodical, the kind of man who showed up to work on time and paid his bills. His colleagues described him as intelligent, maybe even brilliant when it came to electronics. Manuel Pereira da Cruz, 32, also married, also an electronics technician. He worked alongside Miguel. They weren't just co-workers, they were friends. The kind of friends who trusted each other with secrets. On August 17th, 3 days before their bodies were discovered, these two men told their families they were going on a business trip to Sao Paulo to buy materials for work and attend a technical conference. Nothing unusual, nothing that would raise alarm bells. They purchased one-way bus tickets to Niterói, took 4,500 cruzeiros in cash, which was a substantial amount of money in 1966, and boarded the bus. But here's the first red flag. Why Niterói? If they were going to Sao Paulo, Niterói is in the opposite direction. Sao Paulo is southwest from Campos. Niterói is southeast, near Rio de Janeiro. They lied about their destination. The question is why? The bus driver later testified that he remembered the two men. They seemed anxious, nervous. They kept checking their watches. At one point during the journey, they asked him to drop them off early, not at the main terminal, but at a specific spot near Morro do Ventum. They got off the bus around 2:30 p.m. carrying a small bag. A witness, a local bar owner, saw them shortly after. They stopped at his establishment and bought 2 bottles of mineral water. He remembered them because one of the men kept looking at his watch, and the other one seemed uncomfortable, sweating despite the cool afternoon breeze. They asked for directions to the top of the hill. The bar owner pointed the way. They thanked him and started walking. That was the last confirmed sighting of Miguel Jose Viana and Manuel Pereira da Cruz alive. 3 days later, on August 20th, that young boy flying his kite found them. But here's what the initial police report stated, and this is crucial. The bodies were lying on their backs, perfectly positioned, side by side. Their raincoats were folded neatly beneath their heads like pillows. The lead masks were firmly in place, covering their eyes and part of their faces. The notebook with the cryptic instructions was found near Miguel's body. No signs of violence, no indication of a struggle. The surrounding vegetation was undisturbed. It was as if they had simply laid down, put on the masks, and died. But humans don't just die like that. There has to be a cause. The investigators knew this. They ordered autopsies immediately. Except here's where the case takes its first truly bizarre turn. The autopsies were delayed. Why? The morgue claimed they were overwhelmed with other cases. Days turned into weeks. By the time the medical examiner finally got around to examining the bodies, decomposition had progressed too far. The internal organs were compromised. Toxicology results would be unreliable at best. The official autopsy report concluded, cause of death, undetermined. Think about that. 2 men die under mysterious circumstances, wearing lead masks with cryptic notes, and the medical establishment essentially shrugs and says, "We don't know." Does that sound like proper investigative protocol to you, or does it sound like someone didn't want answers? Let's talk about those lead masks for a moment, because they're the most haunting element of this entire case. Lead is heavy. It's toxic. It's not something you casually wear on your face. Lead masks are specifically designed for one purpose: protection from radiation. X-ray technicians use them. Nuclear facility workers use them. People who need to shield themselves from harmful electromagnetic radiation use them. So why would two electronics technicians climb a remote hill in Brazil and put on lead masks? The most popular theory, and the one that captured the public imagination immediately, was that Miguel and Manuel were attempting to contact extraterrestrial beings. UFO enthusiasts point to the fact that Brazil in the 1960s was experiencing a wave of UFO sightings. Morro do Vintém itself had been the site of reported strange lights in the sky. Some witnesses claimed to have seen objects hovering over the area in the weeks leading up to the deaths. The lead masks, according to this theory, were meant to protect the men from the intense radiation emitted by alien spacecraft. The signal, mentioned in their note, was supposedly the arrival of a UFO. They were waiting for contact. Sounds far-fetched? Maybe? But consider this. In the 1960s, the Brazilian government was secretly investigating UFO phenomena. Declassified documents from that era show that military officials took these reports seriously. There were protocols in place. There were investigations. This wasn't just folklore and superstition. Something was happening in Brazilian skies that authorities couldn't explain. And Miguel and Manuel weren't uneducated peasants prone to wild fantasies. They were trained technicians who understood electronics, radiation, and electromagnetic fields. If anyone would know how to prepare for contact with advanced technology, it would be them. But let's pump the brakes on the alien theory for a moment, because there are other possibilities that are just as disturbing, if not more so. Theory number 2. They were murdered. Think about it. Two men with knowledge of electronics and radiation. Two men carrying a significant amount of cash. Two men who lied about their destination and met someone or something on that hill. What if they were involved in something illegal? Something dangerous, something that got them killed? In the 1960s, Brazil was under military rule. The government was paranoid about communism, espionage, and internal threats. There were whispers of secret police operations, disappearances, and cover-ups. What if Miguel and Manuel had stumbled onto classified information? What if they were building something they shouldn't have been building? What if someone needed them silenced? The lead masks could have been placed on their faces after death to stage the scene, to make it look like a bizarre suicide or cult ritual, diverting attention from the real motive, assassination. But here's what doesn't fit. If this was a professional hit, why leave the bodies in such a public location? Why stage such an elaborate scene? Why not just make them disappear? Assassins don't typically leave cryptic notes and strange props. They work cleanly, efficiently, and they vanish. Unless, of course, the staging was intentional. Unless the goal was to create a mystery so bizarre that no one would look for the real truth. Detective investigating the case, a man named Ventura Fernandes, didn't buy the murder theory. He was convinced that Miguel and Manuel died voluntarily, but not suicide in the traditional sense. He believed they were part of a spiritualist group, a cult that practiced rituals involving altered states of consciousness. This brings us to theory number 3, the occult ritual. Brazil has a rich tradition of spiritualism. Spiritism, Umbanda, Candomblé. These are religions and practices that involve communication with spirits, astral projection, and altered states of consciousness. In the 1960s, there were numerous groups, some legitimate, some fringe, that experimented with combining technology and spiritualism. They called themselves scientific spiritualists. They believed that electronic devices could be used to facilitate communication with other dimensions. They thought that by ingesting certain substances and using equipment to generate electromagnetic fields, they could project their consciousness beyond the physical body. Detective Fernandes discovered that Miguel had been attending meetings of a spiritualist group in Campos dos Goitacazes in the months before his death. Witnesses confirmed that these meetings involved discussions about dimensional travel, spiritual ascension, and the use of technology to enhance psychic abilities. One witness, whose identity was never publicly revealed, told police that the group had been planning a grand experiment. They believed that on a specific date, at a specific location with strong electromagnetic properties, they could achieve a breakthrough. They could leave their physical bodies and ascend to a higher plane of existence. The lead masks, according to this theory, were meant to protect their physical bodies from the intense electromagnetic energy they believed would be generated during the ritual. The capsules mentioned in the note? Likely a psychedelic substance. DMT, LSD, or something similar. Something that would alter their consciousness and make them receptive to the experience. They weren't trying to contact aliens. They weren't murdered by government agents. They were attempting to transcend reality itself, and something went catastrophically wrong. This theory gained traction when investigators discovered that a similar incident had occurred months earlier in the same region. Two other men, also involved in spiritualist practices, had been found dead under mysterious circumstances. They too had been positioned carefully. They too had strange objects near their bodies, but those deaths were quickly ruled as suicides and forgotten. Was there a pattern? Were multiple groups conducting these dangerous experiments? And if so, who was leading them? Who was convincing educated men to risk their lives chasing the impossible? The police tried to track down other members of the spiritualist group that Miguel had been attending. But here's the problem. No one would talk. The few members they managed to identify either denied knowing anything about a ritual or refused to cooperate with the investigation. One man, when pressed, simply said, "Some knowledge is not meant for everyone. Some doors once opened cannot be closed." Cryptic, ominous, and utterly unhelpful to investigators trying to understand what killed two men on a hill. But let's get back to the physical evidence, because there's something crucial that doesn't make sense no matter which theory you believe. The raincoats. Miguel and Manuel were wearing raincoats when their bodies were found. It wasn't raining that day. The forecast had been clear. Why would two men climbing a hill in August, which is winter in Brazil but generally dry in that region, wear raincoats? Unless they were expecting something. Unless they knew they would need protection from something other than rain. One investigator suggested that the raincoats were meant to protect them from dew or moisture that might interfere with electronic equipment. This implies they were carrying devices, but no electronic equipment was found at the scene. If they brought radios, transmitters, or any kind of machinery up that hill, it was gone by the time the bodies were discovered, stolen, confiscated, dissolved into another dimension. Pick your explanation, but the absence of that equipment is a glaring hole in every theory. Now let's talk about the money. Miguel and Manuel had withdrawn a substantial sum before leaving Campos. They used some of it to buy bus tickets and the mineral water. But when their bodies were found, most of the cash was still in their pockets, untouched. If this was a robbery or a murder for financial gain, why leave the money? If they were buying something illegal, drugs, or stolen equipment, where is it? The money suggests that whatever they intended to do on that hill, they hadn't completed the transaction. They died before they could finish what they started. There's another detail that most people overlook. The location itself. Morro do Vintém wasn't random. That hill has a history. Long before 1966, local indigenous tribes considered the area sacred. They believed it was a place where the boundary between worlds was thin, where spirits could cross over, where the living could speak to the dead. Portuguese colonizers later reported strange phenomena in the area. Lights in the sky, sounds with no source, compasses malfunctioning. In the 1950s, a geologist surveying the region noted unusual magnetic readings near the summit of Morro do Vintém. He couldn't explain them. He filed his report and moved on. But what if Miguel and Manuel knew about those readings? What if they specifically chose that location because of its electromagnetic properties? If you're trying to conduct an experiment involving radiation, altered consciousness, or communication with other dimensions, you'd want a location with natural electromagnetic anomalies. You'd want a place where the laws of physics might be just a little bit flexible. Morro do Vintém fit that description perfectly. 3 months after the bodies were discovered, a journalist named João Silva managed to track down Miguel's widow. She hadn't spoken to the press. She was grieving, confused, and angry that her husband's death had become a spectacle. But João convinced her to talk off the record. What she told him was never officially published, but João shared the details with colleagues, and those details eventually leaked. According to Miguel's widow, her husband had changed in the months before his death. He had become secretive. He would disappear for hours, claiming he was working late. He started reading books about physics, consciousness, and metaphysics, books that had nothing to do with his job. When she asked him about it, he told her he was on the verge of a breakthrough, something that would change everything. She asked him what kind of breakthrough. He smiled and said, "Imagine if you could see beyond what your eyes show you. Imagine if you could touch infinity." She thought he was being poetic, romantic even. She didn't realize he meant it literally. The night before he left for what he claimed was a business trip, he held her hand and told her, "If something happens to me, know that I didn't suffer. Know that I chose this." Those words haunted her, because they suggested that Miguel knew there was a risk. He knew he might not come back, and he went anyway. Why? What could possibly be worth dying for? What knowledge, what experience, what revelation could be so valuable that an educated man with a family would gamble his life? Here's where the case takes an even darker turn. In 1967, a year after the deaths, a man named Elson walked into a police station in Rio de Janeiro. He was nervous, sweating, barely able to form coherent sentences. He told the officer on duty that he had information about the lead mask's case, information that could explain everything. The officer, skeptical but curious, brought him in for questioning. What Elson revealed in that interrogation room was never made public until decades later, when archived police documents were finally declassified. Elson claimed he had been part of the same spiritualist group as Miguel. He said the group had been conducting experiments for over 2 years. They called themselves the Seekers of the Threshold. Their goal wasn't just spiritual enlightenment. They believed they could physically transport their consciousness to another dimension, a place they called the Superior Realm. The group's leader, a man Elson would only identify as the Teacher, claimed to have visited this realm multiple times. He said it was a place of pure energy, where physical bodies were unnecessary, where knowledge was infinite, and where human suffering didn't exist. But getting there required precise conditions, the right location, the right electromagnetic frequency, the right substances to unlock the mind's potential, and, most importantly, the right protection for the physical body left behind. That's where the lead mask came in. According to the teacher, when consciousness leaves the body and enters the superior realm, the body becomes vulnerable to dimensional radiation. Without protection, the traveler's consciousness might not be able to return. The body would die, but worse, the consciousness would be trapped between dimensions, unable to exist fully in either world. The lead masks were supposed to be the anchor, the shield, the lifeline back to physical reality. Miguel and Manuel had volunteered to be the first to attempt the full transition. Not just a brief visit, but a permanent crossing. They believed they were going to ascend. They thought they were going to become something more than human. Elson told police he had tried to talk them out of it. He said the experiments they had done before, the small tests, had produced disturbing results. One member had taken the capsules and worn a prototype mask. He claimed to have seen the superior realm, but when he came back, he was different. He couldn't speak properly for days. He would stare at walls for hours. His wife said he would wake up screaming about the Watchers and the ones who don't let you leave. 3 weeks later, that man walked into the ocean and drowned himself. The police ruled it a suicide. The group called it a failed transition. But Miguel and Manuel were convinced they could succeed where others had failed. They had refined the process. They had calculated the exact electromagnetic frequency of Moro du Vintam. They had acquired purer substances, stronger masks, better preparation. The teacher gave them the instructions, the timeline, the ritual. 16 to 30 be at the determined place. 18 to 30 ingest capsules. After effect protect metals await signal mask. But here's what Elson revealed that changed everything. The capsules weren't just psychedelics. They contained a compound that the teacher had created himself. A mixture of a hallucinogenic substance and a chemical that would slow their heart rates to near death. The idea was that by bringing their physical bodies to the brink of death, their consciousness would be free to leave. And once they reached the superior realm, once they confirmed it was real, they would will themselves back. Their hearts would restart. They would return as proof that transcendence was possible, except they never came back. The police wanted to find the teacher. They wanted to arrest him, charge him with negligent homicide at minimum, murder at worst, but Elson couldn't, or wouldn't, tell them who he was. He said the teacher had disappeared the day after Miguel and Manuel died. The entire group had disbanded. Everyone scattered. Some moved to different cities. Some left Brazil entirely. They were terrified that they would be next. Terrified that whatever happened on that hill could happen to them. Elson's testimony should have broken the case wide open. It should have led to arrests, trials, justice. But instead, his statement was filed away, buried in archives. The official investigation was quietly closed. The conclusion remained, cause of death undetermined. Why? Why would authorities drop a case with a credible witness providing detailed information about a potential cult? Some researchers believe it's because the military government didn't want public panic. Brazil in the 1960s was already dealing with political instability. The last thing they needed was a scandal involving cults, mind-altering substances, and 2 dead technicians. Better to let the case fade into obscurity. Better to let people think it was just an unsolved mystery. But there's another possibility, a darker one. What if the government already knew about the Seekers of the Threshold? What if they had been monitoring the group? What if Miguel and Manuel's experiment was allowed to happen because someone in power wanted to see if it would work? This isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. Declassified documents from the United States reveal that the CIA conducted experiments throughout the 1950s and 60s involving LSD, sensory deprivation, and attempts to weaponize psychic abilities. Project MKUltra, Project Stargate. These were real programs with real funding and real casualties. Is it possible that Brazil had similar programs? That the Seekers of the Threshold were being used as unwitting test subjects? That Miguel and Manuel died not in pursuit of enlightenment, but as part of a government experiment into consciousness and dimensional travel? There's no direct evidence. But the rapid closure of the investigation, the mishandling of the autopsies, the disappearance of key witnesses, it all points to something more than bureaucratic incompetence. Let's shift focus for a moment because there's one aspect of this case that rarely gets discussed, and it might be the most important. The second mask, when Miguel and Manuel's bodies were found, they each had a lead mask on their face. But investigators also found a third mask at the scene, partially hidden under vegetation, never worn, completely intact. Why would they bring 3 masks if there were only 2 of them? The obvious answer: they were expecting a third person, someone who was supposed to join them on that hill. Someone who either never showed up or left before the police arrived. Detective Fernandez pursued this lead aggressively. He interviewed everyone who knew Miguel and Manuel. He checked phone records, though they were sparse in those days. He tracked bus manifests. He was looking for the third person. He never found them, but he did find something interesting. A week before the deaths, Miguel had purchased 3 tickets to a lecture on electromagnetic theory in Rio de Janeiro. 3 tickets. He attended with Manuel. The third ticket was used, but the identity of the third attendee was never recorded. After the lecture, witnesses saw Miguel and Manuel talking with a tall, thin man with silver hair and dark glasses. They seemed animated, excited. The conversation lasted about 20 minutes. Then the silver-haired man walked away, and Miguel and Manuel headed in the opposite direction. Who was he? Was he the teacher? Was he the third member who was supposed to be on the hill? Or was he someone else entirely? Someone with his own agenda? The police showed witnesses photos of known spiritualist leaders in the region. None matched the description. They checked immigration records, looking for foreigners who might have been in Brazil at that time with backgrounds in physics or the occult. Nothing conclusive. The silver-haired man became a ghost, a shadow in the story that no one could identify. But let's consider this. What if the third person did show up on Morro do Vintém? What if they watched Miguel and Manuel perform the ritual, ingest the capsules, put on the masks, and die? What if they took any electronic equipment that was there, took the evidence, and left the bodies to be found? Why would someone do that? Unless they wanted to see if the ritual worked. Unless they were studying the results. Unless Miguel and Manuel were never meant to succeed. They were meant to be test subjects. This theory positions the entire incident not as a spiritual quest or a tragic accident, but as a cold, calculated experiment. Miguel and Manuel were lab rats. Their families were collateral damage. And whoever was behind it got exactly what they wanted, data. Now here's something that will make your skin crawl. In 2004, 38 years after the original case, a documentary filmmaker named Ricardo Gomes was researching the lead mask's case for a project. He traveled to Morro do Vintém, interviewed locals, dug through old police reports, standard investigative work. One evening, while reviewing footage he had shot on the hill, he noticed something strange in the background of one frame. A figure, standing in the tree line, watching. Ricardo froze the frame and zoomed in. The figure was tall, thin, wearing dark clothing. And though the image was grainy, though it was partially obscured by shadows, Ricardo could make out one detail clearly: silver hair. He checked the metadata on the footage. The date was August 20th, 2004, exactly 38 years to the day after the bodies were discovered. Ricardo returned to the hill the next day, hoping to find the person, to get an explanation. He searched for hours. Nothing. No one. Just trees, rocks, and the wind. But when he got back to his hotel that night, there was a note slipped under his door, handwritten on plain paper. It said, "Some thresholds are not meant to be crossed. Some questions are not meant to be answered. Leave this alone." Ricardo ignored the warning. He continued his investigation. 2 weeks later, all of his footage, all of his notes, every piece of research he had compiled on the lead mask's case vanished from his apartment. No signs of forced entry. No witnesses. Just gone. He filed a police report. Nothing came of it. He tried to recreate his work from memory, but without the original materials, without the interviews, the project fell apart. The documentary was never completed. Ricardo eventually moved to Portugal and refused to ever speak about the case again. But before he left Brazil, he told one person what he had discovered, a journalist friend named Ana Costa. And Ana, quietly, carefully, continued digging where Ricardo had been forced to stop. What Ana uncovered was a pattern. She found that every 10 to 15 years, someone would become obsessed with solving the lead mask's case. A journalist, a researcher, a documentary filmmaker. They would make progress. They would get close to something. And then, suddenly, they would stop. Their materials would disappear. They would receive warnings. Some would leave the country. Others would simply drop the investigation and refuse to explain why. It was as if someone, or some organization, was actively monitoring anyone who got too close to the truth, actively suppressing information, actively protecting whatever really happened on that hill in 1966. Ana tried to find patterns in what these investigators had discovered before they were silenced. She managed to track down a few of them. Most wouldn't talk. But one, an elderly former police detective named Almeida, who had worked on the original case, agreed to meet her at a cafe in Sao Paulo in 2009. Almeida was in his 70s by then, retired, living off a modest pension. He had nothing to lose, he said, nothing to fear anymore. He was willing to tell Ana what he knew, what he had been ordered to keep quiet about. According to Almeida, 3 days after the bodies were discovered, 2 men in civilian clothes arrived at the police station. They didn't identify themselves beyond showing federal credentials. They didn't explain why they were there. They simply requested all physical evidence related to the case. The masks, the notebook, the clothing, everything. The local police chief, Almeida's superior, handed it over without question. No paperwork, no receipt, no chain of custody documentation. The federal agents took the evidence, put it in a black case, and left. Almeida never saw those items again. And officially, according to police records, that evidence was never logged as missing. It simply ceased to exist in the documentation. But here's what Almeida told Ana that chilled her to the bone. Before the federal agents left, one of them pulled the police chief aside. Almeida was standing close enough to hear part of the conversation. The agent said this didn't happen. These men died of natural causes. Heart failure. The masks, the note, the circumstances, those are irrelevant details that will only confuse the public. Close the case. Move on. Do you understand? The police chief nodded. The case was closed the next day. Almeida said he tried to protest. He told his chief that they had a duty to investigate properly, to give the families answers. The chief looked at him with tired, frightened eyes and said, "Some things are bigger than us. Some things we don't question. Drop it or you'll regret it." Almeida dropped it. He worked the rest of his career, retired, and lived with the guilt of knowing he had been part of a cover-up. He told Anna that he was speaking to her because he was old, because he didn't have much time left, and because he needed someone to know that the truth had been deliberately buried. Anna asked him what he thought really happened, what he believed the federal government was hiding. Almeida was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I think Miguel and Manuel stumbled onto something they weren't supposed to know. I think they were involved in experiments that someone very powerful was running, and when they died, it became a liability. The government couldn't admit that citizens were conducting dangerous research into things that shouldn't be researched, so they made the case disappear." Anna pushed further. "What kind of research? What things?" Almeida leaned in close and whispered, "Consciousness weapons. The ability to leave your body, to project your mind into another location, to gather intelligence without being physically present. Imagine the military applications. Imagine spies who don't need to infiltrate buildings because they can project their consciousness inside. Imagine assassins who kill without ever being in the same room as their target." It sounds like science fiction. It sounds absurd. But remember, the United States was researching exactly these concepts during the same time period. The Stargate project ran for over 20 years, spending millions of dollars trying to develop remote viewing and psychic espionage. Why wouldn't Brazil, caught in the Cold War just like everyone else, pursue similar research? And why wouldn't they use willing volunteers, people like Miguel and Manuel, who believed they were serving a higher spiritual purpose, when in reality they were guinea pigs? Anna published a carefully worded article about her conversation with Almeida in 2010. She didn't name him. She didn't make direct accusations. She simply presented the information as one possible theory among many. The article was published online and in a small independent newspaper. Within 48 hours, it was scrubbed from the internet. The newspaper received a cease and desist letter from a law firm representing unnamed government officials, claiming defamation and demanding a retraction. Anna refused. A week later, her apartment was broken into. Her laptop was stolen. Her backup drives were gone. Just like Ricardo before her, all her research vanished. She got the message. She stopped investigating. She moved to a different city, changed careers, and never wrote about the lead mask's case again. But before she disappeared from the story, she sent an encrypted email to several trusted colleagues in journalism. In that email, she included one final piece of information, something Almeida had told her off the record, something she had been too afraid to include in her article. Almeida told her that in the months after the case was closed, 3 other members of the Seekers of the Threshold died under suspicious circumstances. One in a car accident, one from an apparent suicide, one from a sudden heart attack at age 32, all ruled as unrelated incidents, all closed quickly, all forgotten. But to Almeida, the pattern was clear. Someone was tying up loose ends, making sure no one who knew the real story would ever be able to tell it. Now let's return to the scientific angle, because there's one element we haven't fully explored yet, and it's the most terrifying. What if Miguel and Manuel actually succeeded? Stay with me here. What if the ritual worked exactly as intended? What if they did manage to project their consciousness to another dimension, to this superior realm they believed in? What if they crossed the threshold? But here's the nightmare scenario. What if they discovered that the superior realm wasn't what they expected? What if it wasn't a place of enlightenment and infinite knowledge? What if it was something else, something hostile? There's a phenomenon in near-death experiences that researchers rarely talk about publicly because it terrifies them. A small percentage of people who are brought back from clinical death report not seeing light, not feeling peace, but encountering something dark, something aware, something that noticed them. They describe it as a presence, an intelligence that exists outside normal reality. And they say it doesn't want to be found. It doesn't want humans poking around in its domain. What if Miguel and Manuel found that presence? What if they opened a door that was meant to stay closed? And what if their deaths weren't the result of drug overdoses or heart failure, but something reaching back through that door and stopping them? This is where the case crosses from mystery into horror. Because if this is true, if there really is something on the other side that objects to being contacted, then everyone who has died investigating this phenomenon, everyone who has been warned off, everyone who has felt that inexplicable dread when getting too close to the truth, they're not experiencing paranoia. They're experiencing a genuine threat from something that operates beyond our understanding of reality. In 2015, a physicist named Dr. Helena Marquez published a paper on electromagnetic anomalies in the region around Morro do Vintém. She wasn't investigating the lead mask's case specifically. She was conducting a geological survey for a mining company, but her instruments detected something unusual. Fluctuations in the electromagnetic field at the summit that couldn't be explained by natural geological formations. The readings were intermittent, appearing and disappearing without pattern, and they were strongest on August 20th every year, on the anniversary of the deaths. The electromagnetic readings spiked. Dr. Marquez noted this in her report, but couldn't explain it. She recommended further study. The mining company decided the area wasn't suitable for their purposes and abandoned the project. Dr. Marquez moved on to other work. But a research assistant who had worked with her on that survey, a young man named Paulo, became fascinated by the anomaly. He started visiting the hill on August 20th each year, taking his own measurements with portable equipment. For 3 years, he documented the same phenomenon. Every August 20th, between 6 p.m. and 7 p.m., the electromagnetic field at the summit would surge. It would reach levels that Paulo described as impossible without an artificial source. On August 20th, 2018, Paulo went to the hill with more sophisticated equipment. He set up a camera. He had instruments to measure not just electromagnetic fields, but also temperature, air pressure, and radiation levels. He live-streamed the entire thing on a small YouTube channel he had created. Only about 30 people were watching. At 6:23 p.m., his instruments started going haywire. The electromagnetic readings jumped off the scale. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in less than a minute, and Paulo, visible on camera, suddenly went rigid. He stood perfectly still, staring at something off camera. His mouth was moving, but no sound was coming out. This lasted for approximately 45 seconds. Then he grabbed his equipment, turned off the camera, and ran down the hill. The live stream ended abruptly. Paulo never uploaded another video. His YouTube channel went dark. People who had been watching tried to reach out to him through comments and messages. No response. 3 weeks later, someone claiming to be Paulo's sister posted a brief message on the channel. It said Paulo had suffered a nervous breakdown and was receiving medical treatment. He would not be returning to YouTube or continuing his research. She asked people to respect his privacy and stop trying to contact him. But here's what's strange. Several viewers who had been following Paulo's work tried to find information about what happened to him. They searched for medical records, police reports, anything that might explain his sudden breakdown. They found nothing. No hospital admissions, no psychiatric holds, no records of Paulo seeking treatment anywhere. It's as if he simply vanished from public life, or was made to vanish. One viewer managed to save the live stream before it was deleted. The footage still exists on obscure corners of the internet if you know where to look, and if you watch it carefully. If you enhance the audio during those 45 seconds when Paulo was standing frozen, you can hear something, a voice, not Paulo's voice, something else, whispering in a language that doesn't sound like Portuguese or Spanish or English or any language anyone has been able to identify. Audio analysts have tried to clean up the recording to figure out what's being said. The consensus is disturbing. It's not gibberish. It has structure. It has rhythm. It sounds like language, but it's not human language. What did Paulo see? What did he hear? What reached out to him on that hill during the electromagnetic surge? We'll never know because Paulo won't tell us. Just like Miguel and Manuel can't tell us. Just like everyone who has gotten too close to the truth has been silenced, either by fear, by force, or by something far worse. Let's step back and look at the complete picture of what we know, and what we can reasonably conclude. 2 electronics technicians died under mysterious circumstances on a Brazilian hillside in 1966. They were wearing lead masks designed to protect against radiation. They had a cryptic note with instructions for some kind of ritual or experiment. They were part of a spiritualist group that believed in dimensional travel and consciousness projection. The physical evidence disappeared into federal custody. The investigation was shut down prematurely. Witnesses and researchers who tried to uncover the truth have been systematically silenced or scared off. The location itself exhibits unexplained electromagnetic anomalies that peak on the anniversary of the deaths. So what really happened? Let me give you my assessment based on everything we've covered. I don't think this was aliens. The UFO theory is compelling, and Brazil absolutely had legitimate UFO activity during that period, but there's no direct evidence connecting extraterrestrials to Miguel and Manuel's deaths. I don't think this was a simple murder either. There's no motive, no suspects, and the staging would be absurdly elaborate for a hit. What I believe, based on the evidence, is that Miguel and Manuel were part of a larger program. Whether it was government-sanctioned research into consciousness and dimensional travel, or whether it was a fringe group experimenting with dangerous combinations of technology and psychedelics, they were attempting something real, something that had been tested before with disturbing results. They went to Morro do Ventamo because of its electromagnetic properties. The government covered it up not because they were directly responsible, but because admitting that citizens were conducting these experiments would open uncomfortable questions about what the government itself might have been researching. Better to bury it. Better to make it a mystery than a scandal. And the ongoing suppression of information, that could be bureaucratic momentum. Once a cover-up starts, it tends to perpetuate itself. Agencies protect their secrets even decades later, even when the original reason for secrecy no longer matters. But here's what I can't explain. The electromagnetic anomalies that continue to this day. The pattern of people being warned off or having their research destroyed. Paulo's experience on that live stream. The whispers that aren't in any human language. Those elements suggest something more than just government secrecy. They suggest that whatever Miguel and Manuel were trying to contact, or whatever dimension they were trying to access, it's still there. It's still active. And every August 20th, for those few minutes, the door they tried to open cracks open just a little bit. Maybe that's why people are warned away. Not to protect government secrets, but to protect them from making the same mistake Miguel and Manuel made. The mistake of thinking that some boundaries are meant to be crossed when they're actually meant to keep something out. Or keep something in. Think about that for a moment. What if the lead masks weren't to protect them from radiation they would generate? What if the masks were to protect them from something that would come through? Something that uses radiation or electromagnetic energy as a pathway into our reality? And if Miguel and Manuel opened that pathway, even briefly, even unsuccessfully, what happens on August 20th each year? Is it an echo of what they did? Or is it something on the other side, still trying to push through, still remembering that two humans once called out to it? I don't have answers. No one does. That's what makes this case so haunting. 59 years later, we're no closer to the truth than we were in 1966. We have theories, we have fragments of testimony, we have patterns of suppression and strange phenomena, but we don't have proof, we don't have closure. What we have is a warning written in the deaths of two men who wanted to see beyond the veil of reality. A warning that some knowledge comes with a price. Some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed. And some mysteries are mysteries for a reason. Miguel Jose Viana and Manuel Pereira de Cruz died on Morro do Vintam wearing masks of lead, with instructions for a ritual in their pockets and hope in their hearts that they would transcend human limitation. Instead, they became a cautionary tale, a reminder that the universe might be far stranger and far more dangerous than we dare to imagine. Their families never got real answers. Investigators were shut down. Researchers were silenced. And somewhere in archive files that most people will never see, the truth sits waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to try one more time to uncover it. The lead mask case remains officially unsolved, cause of death undetermined. But we know better, don't we? We know that something happened on that hill, something that powerful people wanted hidden, something that continues to manifest every year on the anniversary. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Maybe we're not supposed to know everything. Maybe some thresholds exist precisely because they're not meant to be crossed. Maybe Miguel and Manuel's greatest lesson isn't in what they discovered, but in what they lost by trying to discover it. So I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to really think about it before you answer in the comments. If you could know with absolute certainty what happened to Miguel and Manuel, if you could understand exactly what they experienced in their final moments, if you could see what they saw and know what they learned, would you want to? Even if that knowledge came with the risk that you might experience what they experienced? Even if understanding the truth meant you could never unknow it? Never go back to seeing reality the way you see it now? Would you cross that threshold? Would you put on the mask and take the capsule and wait for the signal knowing what it cost them? Drop your answer in the comments. Tell me if you'd pursue the truth no matter the cost, or if some mysteries are better left unsolved. And while you're down there, if this story gripped you the way it gripped me, hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications, because next time we're diving into another case that authorities tried to bury. Another story that someone, somewhere, desperately doesn't want you to hear. And trust me, you won't want to miss it. What would you do? Would you dare to know the truth behind the lead masks?